episode of Harrison Hobbies. Today we are going to be looking at some video cards. So this is the first official video of 2020 here. I've still got a couple in work that I haven't uploaded yet, but this is the first official. Some major milestones. First off, we hit over 100 subscribers. I think we're, at the time of filming this, we're at 105, so that is incredible. Once the pandemic hit, all my meetings became virtual. I wanted to learn a little bit more about kind of my strengths and weaknesses in speaking, so I figured what better way to do that than to do a YouTube video and see what kind of weird habits and patterns I have. So I did that, and this has kind of been the result. So I think the fact that this was more of a curiosity has actually turned into more than 100 people find my content interesting enough to subscribe is pretty cool. So keep subscribing, keep liking the videos, and we'll keep doing more of these things that I would normally be doing without a camera in front of me. But today I've got a bunch of video cards here. I've been trying to pick these up locally whenever I see them for sale online, because with today's market here, shortage of DDR6 memory, shortage of chips, shortage of everything, we're probably not going to be seeing any of the new Radeon graphics. We're not going to be seeing any of the 30 series anytime soon in plentiful enough quantities. But it's easy enough today to find 2060s, 2070s, and the 16 series cards. When I was looking online for kind of the card that I wanted to upgrade to, you can find dimensions online, but you can't necessarily find head-to-head comparisons. So these are the cards that I've got so far here. I've got some older, 10 series cards here. We've got a bunch of 16 series, and we've got, I think, one 20 series somewhere here. Maybe that one. But yeah, so the intent of today's video here is we'll go through kind of head-to-head comparison, and we'll look at dimensions, we'll look at connectors, we'll look at some features, and then we'll probably run a benchmark on all of these that will show what these might do mining. We've kind of got a double whammy here. There's not enough supply of cards to go around, and crypto mining is booming again. I mean, Bitcoin hit $40,000 some just the other day, so there's a pretty high demand. So we'll see what kind of hash rates we can get with these. So I'll post a link to that video somewhere on the screen here, and check that out if you're interested. So to make our review a little bit easier here, again, we have kind of three camps here. We've got our 1650s here, we've got our 1660s here, and then we lastly have our 2060 here, and again, our reference cards. But let's get started. So the first card that we're going to look at here is going to be the MSI. So this is a 1660 base. And if we look around here, we'll start out with, again, nice big open heat shroud here, but this has an extrusion with with all of your ribbing here going transverse to the actual direction of airflow that you'd expect. So in theory here, this thing will not be good at venting that hot air out of your case. It's going to be blowing the air top and bottom. So you're probably going to need some supplementary cooling in your case. For a port selection, you're a little bit better here. We've got 3 display ports and 1 HDMI, so a little bit more relevant than most of the 1050s. In here, you've got 2 fans. Once you get into this category, you're a little bit higher end. You're going to end up with a 4-pin power connector, so these are going to be PWM fans. On here, you have really good cooling on the bottom there, so you can kind of see those blue pads. You got blue pads touching all your memory modules here. You've got a dedicated bar right here, touching your VRMs, if you can look kind of in that little port right there. But again, the downfall of that is going to be the fact that you have that little micro heat sink right here, but because you have an aluminum heat sink in here that's basically covering the whole plate, you're not going to get any airflow down there. You do have 2 beefy heat pipes here and what appears to be a backplate, but unfortunately this is just plastic that's been silk screened. You have some of your access holes here, and it actually wraps around the backside here, presumably for aesthetics. But again, that's just going to trap heat. In fact, it would probably be better off from a thermal design perspective to not have any backplate on here, because your plastic is going to be insulative, so that's going to be a little bit harder for this card to breathe. Again, these aren't incredibly high power, so I wouldn't necessarily expect that to be, the demise of this card. But it's one of those things where, you may think that you're actually getting something that you're not. Lastly on here, it does have your standard 4-pin connector right over here. So that is going to be kind of coincident to the top of your your card here, so any power adapter you have is going to stick out proud, and you're already a little bit tall for this. You know, I mean, if we look back to like the 1070 Ti, which is kind of what this is competing with directly, you know, you used to have basically coincident to the top of your PCIe bracket, and on these cards they keep getting taller and taller. So on most cases, again, that's probably not going to be a big deal, but at some point it may be. And then you can kind of see that one other note, we do have a couple of RAM chips right here. Let's see if we can see them. A couple of RAM modules here, and the blue pad is just touching the corner of them. But they're still pretty exposed. But again, a little bit of cooling maybe on the corner. Hopefully we'll get some heat action there that'll transmit through. But we'll do a quick measure, and then we will get some dimensions. So this thing weighs 1 pound 9.7. Even though we may be kind of talking poorly about the design of the actual heatsink on here being, you know, a bunch of just aluminum extrusion, it certainly does have more mass to it. And that plastic backplate is probably going to be relatively lightweight. As for some quick dimensions, from the bottom of your adapter here to the top, we are looking at 4 7/8 inch tall. We are looking at 8 inches on the nose for length. And then your height is going to be slightly less than 1 PCIe slot, right? We don't see any material sticking beyond this brim right here. If we were to attach our 8-pin connector here, let's see, this is going to be, we'll add a little bit of extra here. So with that bend, you're looking probably at around 6 inches. You may be able to get away with a little bit less, but it should be pretty close between here and bent over cables, about 6 inches, so make sure you got enough clearance for that. And the MSI card here is going to be a little bit different, right? We've, again, got a little bit of height, extra height here. You're running, what, maybe about 1/2 inch, similar to what we saw in the Gigabyte. And then in terms of length, it's a little bit shorter than the Gigabyte, but you know, we have a little bit of an overhang. In terms of thickness, this is a legitimate 2-slot card. It's actually, I would say it's not by a lot, not by a large margin, but it's actually probably one of the thinnest 1660s that we've got here. So I would wager that it is the thinnest, but again, we're talking, you know, fractions of an inch here. So nothing really perceivable there. Next, we've got a PNY GTX 1660 Super. So unlike the MSI that was just the base, this is going to be our super card. Again, this is incredibly basic. We have a 4-pin connector for the fan, so that's nice over the 1050 version of this. We have a 4-pin or an 8-pin for power. We don't have any backplate on here, so it's basically just bare. The heatsink on here, though, is a triple heat pipe design. So this is going to be the first that we've seen with a triple heat pipe. So we've got kind of one over here, and then on here we've got another 2 that are kind of sandwiched together. They're smaller diameter than the heat pipes that we see in the MSI and the other cards, but the fact that there are 3 there should keep the heat going pretty well. And then again, this is just kind of the, these appear to be also aluminum fins that are just kind of, you know, spotted together. So it should be pretty efficient. And the fact that, you know, they're not transverse here, they're going this way. So as that fan blows, it should channel that air kind of out of the front. Speaking of the front, we have a really basic I/O compared to all these. You know, this looks like a 1050 here. We've got DisplayPort, HDMI, and a DVI. And then this honeycomb here it's got a lot of material in between, so it may not be super efficient. And then we end up with some increases in surface area here. So this is kind of nice. The fact that, like, underneath here, we just have this solid plate that you can kind of see right there below the fins. And so that basically covers the entire bottom of the card. I can see heat pads in here that are attached to all of our memory modules. It looks like the VRMs are hit by that. So, you know, even though this may be a relatively basic design, in terms of keeping all your memory modules cool and everything cool, this is going to be the best. If we look in there, though, that actual plate, you can't see any of the PCB under. So any of the secondary chips underneath that plate that aren't, you know, thermally coupled to that with heat pads probably will be getting pretty warm. But again, those shouldn't be key players in this game. And then the fact that we don't have any, again, I would rather see no heat plate on the back or no backplate than a plastic backplate. But it's a pretty basic card in that. Again, it's small, and then we'll compare this directly to the 1650 from earlier. So again, the 1650 from earlier, even though it is extruded aluminum, is going this direction here, so it's going to be able to exhaust that heat out of the side here and a little bit into the back, but again, it is shrouded here. So you're going to end up with some high static pressure on this side and then lower static pressure. So even though the fan is probably going to be blowing 50% here, 50% here, you'll kind of end up with a little bit of a U-turn there, so it'll have a propensity to stick air out of the back here. If we compare that to this card here, same thing, right? You end up with a little bit of exposure here, so it'll be able to channel some of our air out this way, but the majority of our air is going to be coming out the front. But this one here is just a solid chunk of aluminum. This is the 1650 versus the 1660 with the heat pipes and actual, fin layout. But coincidentally, their IOs are identical. If you only looked at these from a backside, basically, you wouldn't be able to tell which is which. Same thing on the front. So the only way of telling is, of course, reading the specs or seeing your power connectors, a 6-pin versus an 8, or, looking in here in the heatsink. And let's get a quick measure of weight so we can figure out how much we've got here. We are running 14.7 ounces. This card here, even though it's got more CUDA cores, it's got more everything, it's weighing on par with what the 1650s do. So I would expect that this thing's probably going to struggle in real life keeping itself cool just because it is small. But it's the double-edged sword of the fact that it's also a lot smaller than anything else. Maybe one that we can look at here. It's a lot smaller than anything else in this lineup. So let's pull some quick dimensions on it. So from the back to the front here, we are running right at 6.5 inches. So from your metal bracket to the back here, 6.5 inches. Height-wise, we should be the same. So we'll go from the base there to the edge of the shroud. You're right at 5 inches, maybe 4 7/8. If we hook up our 8-pin adapter, because this here is ramped, it starts out high on this side and then it declines down. This power, your actual power port here, is going to be coincident to the top. So, but if we bend these cables down, again with the 8-pin, you probably need a little bit better bend relief there. But you're going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of, say, 5.5 inches. So I would say 5.5 inches is going to be safe from, kind of where you plug that in up to the top there. So basically what I would do is measure the, the top of your PCIe port up to here. And that'll give you that dimension. So overall, pretty basic card, but again, probably a little cheaper than some of these options. And here's the PNY with our reference GTX 1060. Aside from height, these are basically identical, right? We can see a little bit of height here, but overall they're pretty close, especially in terms of length. So if you're running currently, this kind of factor of either 1060, 1070, 1080. I think Gigabyte made one that was basically this size. It was a 1080 or even the 20 series. And for some reason you wanted to step over to a 1650 like this. Next, we'll do my personal favorite here because I'm an EVGA fanboy. And we have a 1660 Ti. So this is the only one that I've seen so far that actually proudly displays what model it is here. So we got a 1660 Ti. This is going to be another finned layout. And again, this is one of these transverse heat sinks. Even though this isn't an extruded piece of aluminum here, this is actually just a bunch of aluminum fins stacked together. You can see through them, therefore they're going this way. So whenever the fans are on, they're not going to have a propensity to blow air out. So this will just kind of cycle heat inside your case. It's an interesting design because there's actually an aluminum plate that's going to make contact with your processor, and that splays out and connects to everything. It's got two heat pipes that connect from about the midpoint here, and then they actually just go back. So it's more of a, I guess, it almost looks like a vapor chamber design, but it's not. I'm pretty sure it's just heat pipes. And then you have an actual kind of plate on the top that keeps everything bound. And I'm not sure if we can see that. See, maybe we can. But you end up with a plate here, and then it connects to the backside here. So this is all kind of, this little piece of brake pressed sheet metal It's going all the way and it's spot welded on. Sorry, it's not spot welded. It looks like it is crimped on to the heatsink itself. Lastly, I/O here is surprisingly basic for it being a more premium card. You end up with a display port, a DVI, and an HDMI similar to our PNY, the low end there. But one nice feature of this is it's the only one in this range that has an aluminum backplate. So that's kind of nice, keeps it protected, it's not intrusive, it will, in theory, help the performance of the card versus hinder. And I know we were talking about it before, and I think we kind of lost track. Your VRMs and your RAM are not coupled to your frame at all, but because this is kind of just a pass-through aluminum sink here, the air should be able to go down right on top of those, so they're not going to be thermally isolated. So that should help out quite a bit with cooling. All of these here have just basic stickers on the fans, so on the fan hub bearing. And then the EVGA is the only one here with textured blades. You can see the little E logo on top of the blades. That in theory should be to prevent any laminate flow, so it adds kind of a turbulent boundary layer. It should keep it quieter, and it should help it move a little bit more air there so the air doesn't get kind of stuck to the blade. And then the back of the card here is, again, somewhat limited in terms of its ability to exhaust because there isn't a lot of perforation or hole there. And some quick dimensions on this card are going to be, we extend a little bit beyond the PCB, so if we're looking at length, we'll do the long point to the short, and we were running right at 7 7/8. So 7 7/8 from here, you could probably round that up right to 8 inches to be comfortable. In terms of height, this is going to be the only one out of pretty much everything we've reviewed recently that's almost coincident to the top, right? So the card, your PCIe slot is right here. It doesn't have a big up and over like the MSI and the PNY and even the Gigabyte we'll look at here in a second. So again, if you're at a small case that you have a little bit of length, this is going to be the card for you. So we'll measure the overall height here. Is going to be right at 4 1/4 inches. So again, it's probably the shortest. And your connector for power right here is going to be basically coincident to your cooler. So if we were to put a piece in like that, and then measure, we are right here at, we'll give ourselves a little bit of extra. We're going to be somewhere in the range of 5 1/4 inches. So 5 1/4 here. Again, that's probably going to be, it won't be too much less than something like this because, again, all of these connectors are coincident to the frame, and sometimes you end up with, the shroud being a little bit more aggressive here to cover. But in the end, your PCBs on pretty much all of these are the same height except for, like, your MSI here that's actually taller. Okay, so we got this one, and let's do a quick weight. So this is going to be 1 pound, 2.8 ounces, all business, since the back plate works. The EVGA here versus our 1060 reference, they're going to be virtually identical in height. So if you're running a 1060 today of this, single fan variant, and you wanted to upgrade to this 1660 Ti because that's kind of in your price range, you will certainly be fine with that. In terms of length, you're a little bit more, and in thickness, you're running virtually the same. So overall, they're very close. And lastly, we have our Gigabyte layout. So this is also going to be a 1660 Ti, so these two are going to be direct competitors. This has a much better I/O. So this is reminiscent of a more premium card with our DisplayPort, HDMI, DisplayPort. Lots of perforation here for cooling, so you're going to have some advantage there. Again, if we look inside, you can tell the heatsink isn't going to be quite as high a quality as what we saw in the EVGA in terms of actual materials. It's got a lot of billet machined aluminum here, blocks. And the nice thing though is, again, the channels, the fins are going to be going lengthwise, so it's going to be able to exhaust the heat out the back. Again, you've almost fully encapsulated the back of the card here, so it will keep the air exiting the hot side of the card here, hopefully, venting that out a little bit better. If we look underneath, basically everything is thermally coupled here, which is going to be super nice. Your fans, you got a 4-pin connector. This card doesn't have a lot of frills, but if you look there, you can see just big chunks of aluminum that are crimped into the actual heatsink, and they're pretty much touching everything. So you're going to have a lot of thermal mass for peaks. So the fact that you have those chunks of aluminum making contact with your VRMs, your memory, means this card is going to be really cool running. You can almost see in the middle there that you can't really see the bottom of the card, just because you have all these chunks of aluminum here. So it's a pretty good design. Again, you have two heat pipes, one going from your chip over to this fan to the back side, and then one that goes from the front over to this side. Plastic backplate here. The one advantage that this has over any of the other plastic backplates, though, is the fact that because you have this chamfered edge here, if we can see, in theory, what's going to happen is the fan's going to blow. It's going to hit this chamfer of the edge, and then it's going to kind of exhaust through. So this is kind of a channel to keep that air. So it looks, and I would assume that's probably right. So the advantage here is that even though, yes, it is a plastic plate and it will provide a little bit of thermal insulation, the fact that that is probably going to actually be channeling air here through is going to keep those components cooler than it would otherwise. So we'll give them some props for having some intelligence there on that one. But overall, again, this card doesn't really have any bells and whistles. It doesn't have any LEDs. It's not flashy. It's a relatively small PCB. The one advantage that we have is, they've oversized the PCB a little bit here if we look at kind of the back side. So we've got an oversized PCB, but then we actually have a notch here where we have a power connector. So that keeps our power input low, which is desirable. Again, the smaller, more compact this is, the better it's going to be. So let's pull some measurements. So this is going to be 1 pound, 4.1 ounce. So from edge to edge, we're at 9 7/8 of an inch. So from here to here is 9 7/8. For a height perspective, we are running 1 5/8 to here. Let's put a power connector in. So with a little bit of strain relief here, we are running somewhere in the neighborhood of, say, 5 1/4. So 5 1/4 inch. That seems to be about the theme for all of these. This isn't overly large. It's not overly small, but overall it's a decent card. The Gigabyte versus our 1060 reference here is going to be a little bit taller. So if we were to pull both of those, the Gigabyte's just a hair taller. I would expect, honestly, that probably wouldn't be too much of an issue. If you're that close already, then you probably should be considering a different card. And then in terms of length, though, you have an extra 1.5 inches or so here on the back of the Gigabyte. So yeah, if you were close on this one here, you're certainly going to be close on this, or maybe even exceeding. But in terms of thickness, they're virtually identical. So this has been a quick summary of our 1660 cards. Again, I am still trying to come across more of these so I can bring them in, benchmark them, see how well they mine, see their features and stuff. So I hope that this information helps somebody. Again, going to try to be getting more of these cards so we can expand this information here. So if you've got any questions, please leave a comment. Again, if you buy anything based off of what I've shown now, or if you have any feedback on what I've presented so far, please share. It would be interesting to see what everybody in this community is picking up here, how much they're getting it for, so we can keep a better pulse on the market. So thanks for watching. Check back soon for more videos.